Hey everybody, welcome to Pianist Academy. I am Charles Szczepanek. I think you can all hear me okay, yeah? We had some technical difficulties getting this set up, but we're starting on time, thankfully. So welcome everybody who is here. I'm glad you could join in for this stream that's on a different day and time than usual. Well, different day than usual, I guess, and hopefully not a different time for too many of you. I know here in the States we changed times this past weekend. So hello, Internet Privacy Advocate. Haven't seen you here in a few weeks. Good to see you. Hello, Calais and C Drive and Antonio, Rob, David, Whitney, welcome. June, welcome. Rhodesy, I see you're here. Awesome. OCD King, Bethany. Wonderful. Okay. It might be, I wonder. Let's see. Nancy, Nathaniel, Diff. Welcome, everybody. So glad. Wow. I'm so glad we have so many people here. I want to know, actually, how did you get notified about the stream today? Did you mark it on your calendar from last time? Or did you see the page for the stream page that you're now watching on? Or did you see my post about the change in times? And Johan, welcome, Johan. I'm curious about that because normally we wouldn't have a stream today. We'd have it next Wednesday. So I'm glad so many of you are here. And I don't know if it was the change in time or what, but we have a jam-packed stream. I didn't even know it was going to be until a few days ago, but jam-packed stream. Glad. Okay, wonderful. It looks like notifications. Well, awesome. Awesome. I'm glad something's working. And I know where many of you are tuning in from, but here in Colorado Springs, we just got a whole lot of snow last night. And I was wondering if it was messing with the internet connection. We got like 5 or 6 inches, and we're supposed to get snow for the next 2 days. Woohoo, I'm excited. I get to watch it from inside the house. So, okay, we're going to jump in because we're going to listen to Rhodesy, a new composition, a long composition from Rhodesy. I think it's your first ballade, right, Rhodesy? We're listening to Antonio play a little bit of Almost Blue, which we heard you play maybe a month ago. So this is like a check-in update. And then I got a couple questions. I got a question from Quentin via email. I think, Antonio, you sent me another question that I'm going to answer. You might have to remind me what that is. And lastly, June. June sent in a question about some fingering discrepancies in 2 different copies of For Release. We're going to tackle all of that first, and then we'll see where we are and see about open question time. Oh, Antonio, yeah, question about pedaling. Now I remember. Wonderful. Nancy, you said you haven't been in snow in 30 years. I hadn't been, when I lived in Arizona, of course, there was no snow for 16 years, the 16 years I lived there. 16 to 17 or so. Yeah. Yes, Nathaniel, more for release. Okay, wonderful. Well, let's get started. So I have queued up Rhodesy's Ballade. It is a very long piece of music, and we're not going to listen to the entire thing. Yeah, Rhodesy, you spoke a little before I got there. We're not going to listen to the whole thing. We're going to listen to about half of it. You know what, Rhodesy? I'll say this. If you had played the whole thing and didn't send in a computer-generated recording, we would probably listen to the whole thing. It's almost 10 minutes long. But, so next time, Rhodesy. But especially because computer-generated stuff can be a little, no matter how beautiful the music is, it can be a little grating to listen to. We're going to jump around to a few spots. So thanks for sending over all those times. We're going to hear, just to give all of you a breakdown of what we're going to hear. We're going to hear about the first minute of this ballade, which is kind of the opening, little introduction or an opening theme. We're going to jump to the big climax of the piece, which is about halfway through. That's about a minute long. And then we're going to listen to the last 3 minutes or so of the piece where the initial theme comes back. So we'll hear a little bit. If you can remember how the piece begins, you'll hear a little bit of that revisited and then expanded upon. And Rhodesy, I'm sure you will love hearing the coda because it's really big and exciting. So we're going to start with this first and mostly talk about, well, yeah, it's all going to be about composition. So let's dive in. I think I've got I have the right piece queued up. Okay, so you're going to see me jump around a little bit. We'll play the first minute, and then I'll jump. You might hear me say something real quietly into the mic, like we're jumping to, and then we'll go from there, all right? Okay. And Calais, awesome. I'm very glad to hear that you had a great lesson with Sue. Awesome. Okay, Rhodesi's Ballade, starting with the introduction. Here we go. Okay, keep that in mind because you're going to hear some material that's like that. We're going to jump now to the big climactic moment, leading into the big climactic moment in the piece. Okay, sorry for all the interruptions. But now jumping to the last 3 minutes. And here comes the big coda. All right. And the crowd goes wild. Let's give Rhodesy a round of applause. Yes, it is Rhodesy's piece, Internet Noteworthy and Internet Privacy Advocate. All right. Rhodesy, you just finished this, right? Yes, and as Nathaniel says, gosh, it would be great to hear you play some of it, Rhodesy. Because I think it would give everybody a very different idea of what the piece actually sounds like. I'll play little snippets here and there for everybody. But it's a lot different when it's not so robotic. So definitely. Yeah, Rhodesy, congratulations. I think you've been taking a lot of what we talk about here and you've been applying it in a nice way. As we talk through the piece, there are going to be one or two things that are going to be kind of common themes that we've talked about before, but hopefully you will be expecting the questions. So, yeah. Let's jump in. All right, I've got the regular score over here. And first off, Rhodesy, why did you write the first 6 bars? How do they help introduce the main theme? If we jump over to the main theme that begins at the andante, okay, that's the main theme. If we go back to the beginning, though, Rhodesy, what is the purpose of the first 6 bars here? So, yeah. Nancy, that's a great question you had. Is it possible to play? Most of it is physically possible. Okay, so Rhodesy, you said because that's going to appear as the intro and it reappears twice. So that's a reason that you used it later in the piece. But why? How does it introduce the piece? You might not have that answer right now, Rhodesy, and that's okay. You know, a lot of the ballades, if we're thinking about Chopin in particular, they do have some kind of introduction. And so I'm not against having one, but it feels a little disconnected from the theme that we get and where it leads from there. Just throwing that out there. No, Rhodesy, I'm on a deeper meaning. You said C minor to the relative major. I want a deeper. I want like an emotional meaning. I want a story meaning. I want a scene meaning. How does it tie in? How does it emotionally prepare us for what's coming? That's the question we need answered. And actually, that goes back to a question that was, let's see. No, was it C Drive? You said, while we were still listening, you said, what makes a piece a ballade? And a ballade is it's usually lyric in nature. Chopin wrote very virtuosic ballades, so we can tend to attribute virtuosity to them as well. But the primary thing is that they should be lyric and they should take you on an emotional journey. They should tell a story. That's actually the reason why I'm asking these questions of Rhodesy. So Rhodesy just said a ballade is a poem or a story. So Rhodesy, I want to know what is the poetry behind the first 6 bars? What are you trying to tell us? And how does it relate to the rest of the story? How are you setting the scene? Where should we be going emotionally with it? As Internet Privacy said, I'm sorry, it looks like I'm getting a whole lot of buffering. So I'm sorry if that's happening on your end. Internet Privacy said, offhand introduction should or would introduce. And yeah, and that is part of what I'm getting at is that those first 6 bars are so far removed from what we get in the first main theme. I would just wonder if there would be a way to tie that together a bit better, Rhodesy. I don't want to spend too long on that because we have a lot of other stuff to talk about. But think about that question. Yeah? Wow. Is it, Rhodesy, you said something is lurking, but then it's all calm? Is there something lurking in the rest of the piece? Since we spend so much time in major? Think about it. You don't have to have the answer right now. That's fine. Wow. Yeah, C Drive, you say yes, lots of buffering. I'm sorry, guys. I was having a problem before we started the stream with this exact issue. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, we'll see if this continues. I'm just going to pause the teaching because if I'm getting all choppy and I'm cutting out, then I don't want to keep going. If people can't hear me. Okay. Why don't you, if you can, because I think, it's just in and out and in and out and in and out. If you can hear me while I'm talking about this, can you let me know when it buffers? Does it pick up where I left off or does it skip forward? I would appreciate that. Okay, thanks, Rosie. You said in the E flat minor part it comes back. Taking a quick break here because I just want to see if we're hearing what happens during the buffering or if it just skips and does a whole bunch of stuff. All right. Nathaniel, you said reduce the video quality. I can't reduce that actually in the middle of the stream. I'm sorry, guys. These are the problems of being live. Rhodesy said maybe get the snow shovel out. Yeah. I don't think that'll help our internet connection here. Okay. Lots of replays a little bit. Okay. Sorry, everybody. If we're going to see, I'm going to give this another couple minutes and see if it catches up. Let's see. Did that work, everybody? Are we fixed? Catherine, you genius. Okay. Well, fingers crossed. Let's jump back in. We just finished hearing Rhodesy play. We were talking about the introduction. We're going to skip forward. And I'm going to pull Rhodesy's music back out. Okay. All right. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. So, here we go. Let's jump forward into... Actually, I have one more thing to say, Rhodesy, about the introduction. So continue thinking about what it means and why it's written there in the first place, right? And I know every time you send me something, Rhodesy, you have finished a piece and you don't have to go back and change. This is always like to learn more for the next time, right? Unless you really want to write a revised, version like Rachmaninoff did with his sonata. Or you could come back in a year and think about it. But, Rhodesy, let's jump back in. Okay, I have one other thing that I have a question about, Rhodesy, more than anything else. And it is, why do we have those accent marks where they're listed? It would seem to me, musically speaking, and this is in bar 3 of the introduction, I think, that they should be in the same place as they were in the previous bar on the main melody. Yes, but then in the next bar, we have okay, yeah, Rhodesy. So, are those accents in the right place? Are they where you intended? Because they would make a lot more sense to me if they were on the octaves. Or was it just a playback thing in MuseScore? It does make 2 voices, Rhodesy, but if we just hear... The accent implies that you minimize the other voice to bring out the one that's accented. If you'd like both... what I would do instead, if you want both voices brought out, don't write an accent, but instead write 2 sets of slurs. So however you want this, maybe one, or one there, and then a second slur from these notes to wherever else you'd like that. That will draw our attention to that there's 2 voices, and not that we should minimize the octave and play out that inner line. I like that there's 2. Yeah? So show 2 sets of slurs instead. And then I think that'll be more of a clue for someone to bring out both. Yeah. Internet says you have to have a good sense of taste. Taste can be built, with practice, time and practice. I sure didn't have great taste, I don't think, when I started writing. But I've developed it, and I have a lot of practice. And I feel like, I hope, what I write gets better every time I start a new project. Let's jump further, Rhodesy. Okay, now we're back in the main theme. Okay, so what I wrote right here, maybe a lower voice, because you have written that this should be ta-da, that sustains, and then that voice possibly is here, or it's this again. I'm not sure which part that this G links to. Does it link to the B that comes? Does it link to E flat that comes? Where does it go? And then depending on that answer, because that is it's impossible to hear on the computer recording because everything's articulated exactly the same way, right? If this is supposed to be second voice, then wonderful. Then great. It doesn't need to change. But if this is just a secondary thing, which is the reason I wrote that is because right on the computer recording that we listened to, it sounds like it goes da, 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 da. That's what's the melody. And it's not clear that that isn't the melody. Okay, so Rhodes, you said second voice. If that's the case, then great, leave it where it is. I was going to say if it's not the case, and this could just apply to others that are working on composition as well, if we have two things that are so close to the same register, that's going to require much more developed technique to differentiate those two voices. And you also, Rhodesy, might consider then tying. Whoops. You might have that G tied to another, maybe half, or maybe just a quarter note, just so we see that that voice actually continues and that it doesn't go anywhere else. But when we write things in a similar register, it can be very easy for someone else playing our music to play and misinterpret that, or miss what we're trying to bring out, or miss the purpose of the notes that we wrote. That's an easy thing to avoid just with a change in registration. So something like that. If you just wanted this to be some passing tones, and then the melody, the uppermost voice would come back later, I would suggest rewriting that to be something like that, where that voice gets dropped an octave just into a different register. Rhodes, you don't have to do that because of what you wrote. But if it wasn't a second voice and it was just a little figure to add some ornamentation or to add some color, I wouldn't always, depending on who the piece is aimed at, I wouldn't always put it in such a close register because it's so aurally confusing for the ear. Yeah? Making sense so far? Okay. Oh, one more thing about the main theme that we heard, Rhodesy. I love this little spot where you introduce triplets. But right there, which is right at the top of the page, gosh, it feels like that wants to go on to be a much longer and more developed phrase, because you do a really nice job of altering the rhythm and the motion in the left hand. This is a really, really nice variation on what you just heard in the previous few measures. And then you go to 1-6-4 here. The expected place would be 5 or 5-7. And you don't have to go there, but when you go from 1-6-4 to 1, it sounds like a really an abrupt ending. Like the idea was like in the middle of, the idea was in the middle of being developed right here, and then it kind of hits a wall and it just stops. That would be something I'd say like, God, you went to A flat on the previous page, right? Oh, you did go to B flat there, and then F or D diminished, and then E flat, and then back to 5. That's a good phrase. Where else could we go after the 1-6-4? Someplace else, maybe not quite that jazzy, but yeah, where else can it go so that it doesn't just we go from one? It's the harmonic component here from 1-6-4 to 1, because 1-6-4, especially when it leads out of other predominant chords These are words we've used before in streams, Road C. Remember, we have tonic and predominant. This is harmonic function, not how we describe chords based on scale degree, like subdominant, etc. Predominant was what comes before the dominant, and then dominant, and many times 1-6-4 is considered part of dominant function, which means, well, one of two things really should happen on a 1-6-4 chord. It should either continue prolongation using predominant, which would be the 4 chord, the 6 chord, the 2 chord, 6 chord, other variations, other harmony that's not diatonic. It could do one of those, or it should go to 5. The one place, based on the rules of harmony, the one place it should not go is back to 1. And unfortunately, that's what happens here. That's the underlying reason why you come out of this beautiful phrase and it sounds like, wow, why did we go back to tonic? Because this was reaching for something new. Something else, right? Okay. Think about that, Road C. Especially for your other pieces. That is, we've talked about harmony like that before. And that is something that we've tended to go back to 1 kind of quickly in other pieces in the past. So how can we continue to prolong? Tonic prolongation doesn't mean going back to tonic. It just means how do we continue to prolong so that we don't get to dominant right away. If that's what you wanted to do, if you didn't want to go to the 5 chord and you didn't want to have that, which, by the way, there would be no reason to not echo or mimic what you did in the first phrase. We're right at the beginning of the piece, and you've already provided a lot of variation in rhythm and registration of the left hand. So you could mimic the exact chord and harmonic structure that you used before, and it would still sound really nice and interesting and new because of the other things that have changed. So, yeah, think about that. You said you wanted to make the melody expand to C and E flat. Great. There are a lot of chords that you could do that with, Road C. C and E flat are a part of... They're a part of a lot of other chords. And you could still create that upward movement. In fact, how could you reharmonize that? The simplest way would be going to C minor. That whole bar works in C minor. Or F minor. It's almost like a C minor over F instead. Like an F extended. Both of those would work, and those are both diatonic options. That would sound really interesting and would keep us from going from 1-6-4 back to 1. That is such a quick ending. Only 5 bars into the phrase. Okay, let's move on. Road C, I don't know if I've already erased some of the notes I've made on the score. So I probably can't email you those. All right. So we skipped forward as we listened to this piece, and we moved to the climax. I'm going to just play a little bit of it, and there's just 2 things that I'd like to mention. So, okay, the climax officially begins here in the last 2 bars of the page that we're looking at. Whatever happens on the next bar, we'll get there in a second. The one thing I wanted to caution you about, Road C, when we play anything on an acoustic instrument, anytime we have repeated pitches, this E flat the three biggest offenders are the three that I circled. But truly, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 E flats in a row that are a part of this harmony. Every time that E flat gets re-articulated on an acoustic instrument, it's going to tend to grow and grow and grow and grow dynamically because the string that's already vibrating is being struck again and again and again and again. So if you want to avoid and just make it a little easier on the performer, of course there are ways to perform this where the E flat doesn't have that problem, but it ends up being almost not playing the E flat, which then kind of questions why it's written in the first place. So what could we do? What if you just revoiced some of that? Something like that. Well, let me show you what I'm doing. So same 2 first notes, maybe even the next one. So even that would work. Or we're alternating around, or something like that. Something like that. Where we're just avoiding using E flat, E flat, E flat, E flat all the time in a row. Some of these bars are better than others in those regard in this climax. In the very next bar, we still have a couple pitches that get repeated in the middle, like those A flats, but they're not quite as much. There's not quite as much to have to worry about because we don't have a single note struck so often. So keep that in mind as you write these big moments like this in other pieces of music that you're working on. Yeah. How else can we write that? Like blocked arpeggiation in the left hand. Next thing, and it's related to that. When we get to the repeat of this material, okay, so stuff like that. The left hand ends up being much of an exact repeat of what just came. We have a lower octave in some of these cases, yes. But, Nathaniel, I'm going to answer that question in just a second. Rotsi, how else? This is a perfect opportunity to develop the left hand in a different way. So it's not a literal repeat. And one of the things that struck me right away was, how can we add some changes in rhythm? Can we hold certain things? So maybe it's bum bum da 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 bum bum da da da, or bum dun dun dum bum dum dum bum, so that we show a little more direction with the left hand instead of having all of these measures that continue to have a constant eighth note motion. Especially because you're purposely not altering the melody very much. That's fine. What else can we do underneath to make it even grander than what it currently is? Yeah. So think about variation in voicing and variation in rhythm. And what if the second time through, or one of these times, I know in a few bars you change keys, but what about varying the harmonic rhythm, the speed at which the harmony changes, so that instead of having just one change per bar, that becomes very predictable, especially after the first time through this material. What if there is a way of introducing a second change in the measure? That could be as simple as changing the inversion halfway through the measure. You could introduce a different inversion. It could help to walk a bass line slightly differently than maybe if it's skipping around. Or you could introduce some completely new chords, maybe twice per bar, maybe more than that. Probably not much more than 3, Rhodesy, oh my goodness, you missed a lot. I'm not going to repeat all that. But we're talking about altering the repeat of the climax, the left hand of the repeat of the climax. And then how can we do that? Can we do that with rhythm? And can we do that with adding different chords and changing the harmonic rhythm so it's no longer one chord per bar, but it's something a little less predictable. And that adds more excitement. Yeah? Okay. I just have one more thing to talk about with this piece, Rhodesy. And then we're going to move over to Antonio's work. Okay. When we did the listen through, I think there are a number of people who are still here. Would it make it more difficult for the performer? It depends on how difficult you make it. I'm not saying to make it like something crazy, technically, but it depends. If you follow, for example, the first two changes and the first two patterns the left hand might make, and they're the same, but then the rhythm changes, that's going to be very easy to learn a difference, and it's going to be very easy to memorize the difference. If you completely change the voicing arrangement, it's going to be a little more difficult. But in that particular moment, what you've written is not super challenging for the left hand. These climbing chords that go back and forth. I mean, we'll put a context around that. It's probably level 10. RCM. I say that's not super difficult because of where you go in the coda, which is what we're going to talk about next. Level 10 is very challenging, but it's not diploma, and it's not some of the most difficult rep that's out there. So think about that. Let's also, so this is the last thing that I wanted to talk about with the piece, and it relates to the question you just asked, but especially in the coda. I jotted a note, and it says, think about the technique you're asking of the pianist and who possesses it. For example, let's jump down to a measure that I can partially, a couple measures I can partially sight read, not at tempo, but there are two technical things that I can point out right away in these measures that make them way more difficult than they need to be, to the point of probably, even for the greatest pianist alive, probably not physically possible to play at the tempo you're asking. One, that jump in 16th note rhythm. And then, but this is supposed to be decca, 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 decca. That is borderline not physically possible because of the direction the hand is going, the reversal for a single pitch, then that has to climb again, and the tempo you're asking it to be performed in. That's part of the reason why when Liszt writes stuff like this, it comes back down. So it's still very challenging, but a lot of Lisztian writing that's broken octaves like this, he brings the hand back into position for the next thing. That's still difficult, but it's nowhere near as difficult as something like that, where you have to jump 2 octaves in just a 16th note time at an incredibly fast speed. You say it's not supposed to be like that. Let's see. So you said an octave below the... supposed to be 1 octave below the high note? I'm not sure. You'd have to renotate that for us, Rhodesy, because I'm not sure what that what you really intend by that. Not quickly, anyway. Okay, second thing. In the very next part of the bar. This doesn't look nearly as challenging, starting with all these triplets that descend. But again, think about the tempo we're playing this at, or you're asking a performer to play this at, and what has to happen between those two notes and those two notes and those two notes and those two notes. What finger plays it? And it's always going to be the thumb, which means at this incredible speed, you're asking people to play thumb, 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 thumb. Oh, you can't see any of that I just wrote. Apologies. Okay. I don't even know if you saw this stuff that I was talking about over here, but now you see it. The ascent and the descent. Okay. Moving across. These notes I've circled that are a part of the triplets right here. Okay. Those are all thumb, 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 thumb. So we go to 5 for the octave. Let's see. We're in E flat. Something like that. So again, if Liszt wrote this, it would likely be, let's see here. We would get the transition to the new harmony earlier in the triplet figure. So it would be, so that we'd never break the rotational movement between the hand. So we'd go up to 5 and always back down to 1, and up to 5 and down to 1, and then down to 1. So each of these, if I go back to the score and kind of renotate this for you, of course we can't ask Liszt exactly what he would have done, but just looking at how he wrote a lot of potentially, instead of starting with the bottom note of the third, this triplet, sorry, or the bottom note of the octave, you would start with the upper one and then go to the bottom, and then go back to the upper one, and then that would be difficult, but then we could transition back down to where you've written. It wouldn't be impossible, it would just be a little bit of a leap. And then again, for the last part of the bar, you transition to playing the upper and then the lower and the upper instead of that one, instead of those. So if I kind of play that for you. Yeah. Because throughout that entire passage now, we are always rotating from 1 to 5 and back and forth and back and forth. We're never asking 5 or 1 to repeat twice in a row. Because at this tempo, which would be something like, what? You're asking somebody to play thumb, 2 thumb strikes. I don't think there's any amount of practice that would make that really possible. But just breaking it is still very difficult. It's very challenging, but it is possible. Okay. That wraps up these comments, Rotsi. I think you've done a great work. A lot of interesting stuff and a lot of progress you've made since the first time you submitted here. So really big congratulations. Nice work. Yeah. Keep thinking about story. Keep thinking about how every note tells the story, right? And then with the technique stuff, I know you said you intended to write something as difficult as possible. Keep in mind, I've said this before, but I would love to have for someone to play your music. I think you would love that too. As composers, we all want someone else to play our music. And it has to be possible. If I was in one of my degree programs playing for a composition student, and they said, "Hey, can you play my recital?" And I said, "Yeah, let me see what you're working on. Let me see what it looks like." And they showed me the coda. I would say, "Not a chance, man. I don't have time to learn that." So think about that. That's something as composers we always need to keep an eye on. And this hits home for me because I have a lot of people, I've been told by many people, and I have some students, even some advanced students, that have trouble playing my arrangements that are much simpler than the writing you just wrote. And most of the time they're much more technically traditional, let's say. Yeah. So keep that in mind, Brodsky. All right. Oh, gosh. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around through that and through the little glitches we had. Let's give Rosie another round of applause. And let me go back to Nathaniel's question before we head over to Antonio's work. Nathaniel said, "You love hearing this kind of analysis and learning these concepts, but can you learn these things without a teacher? You don't follow composition classes, but you have other general classes where these topics are touched upon briefly." I think it is possible, Nathaniel, to learn this stuff without a teacher. It's going to be a little challenging. It's going to be challenging to know what repertoire to look at and how deeply should we analyze what's happening, because the level of analysis can go very granular to the very, very bones of structure and exactly how pitches and intervals are being used in harmony. And we can also look at harmony from a broader, more of an overview. So that part, kind of ascertaining for yourself what component to look at and learn, it's possible, but that's going to be difficult. And that's where really a teacher you can learn all the concepts. All the concepts are available online, but knowing which one to learn first is the hard part. And even I might say, gosh, find a textbook. But even those don't always, they'll be better than nothing. Let's put it that way. But textbooks, depending on your level, your previous theory background, sometimes they can jump very quickly into very advanced topics because, they'll assume after 10 pages of talking about Roman numeral analysis, you're an expert at it. And most of the time, that's not the case. Thanks, June. I will get to your question. It'll probably be in another 30 or 45 minutes. So look about an hour and a half into the stream. Thanks for being here, though. Rodsey said you might get a Martian to play it. Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Antonio, you're up. Oh, and Nancy's comment, documentary. I haven't seen the John Williams documentary yet. I would love to. And yes, a lot of composers, John Williams is probably one of the last that actually hand writes at the piano, but a lot of composers still write at an acoustic instrument and not on a computer and not with MIDI. A lot of great composers will do that still. Yes, okay. Here we go. Let me cue it up, Antonio, and then we're going to take a listen. Okay, Antonio's playing Almost Blue, and this is kind of an update on his progress. We heard you play this, Antonio, a couple weeks ago, something like that. And so you've incorporated some of the stuff that we talked about in the last session. Hey, Wesley. And let's just give Antonio a listen. Here we go. All right. Nice work, Antonio. Let's give Antonio a round of applause. Very good. Big progress since last time, Antonio. So thanks for sending us an update. It's always great to hear. Yeah, Bethany. Bethany said you like how relaxed this feels. There's some lovely chords. I agree. And Wesley, I'm going to come back to your question. In short, let me just answer it very, very, very quickly. But I run all the audio through Pro Tools and a handful of processing. Yes, so yes to EQs, compression, no limiting, but yes to all of that, and then it comes back and gets synced with the video feed for the broadcast. I can go into more depth, but I'm going to do that after I talk about Antonio's work and the other couple questions I got before the stream started today. But thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Okay, Antonio, first up, nice work. You're looking a lot more fluid at the piano. There are still some times where, I noticed like a hand would leave and kind of maybe hover over here while the other hand does something. If you can keep engaged with both hands, it looks better. Doesn't have any effect on what it sounds like, but it just looks nice if one hand doesn't pull back and kind of hover in the air. If you do want to take one off and just play with one hand, and play something else, just bring it all the way down to your lap and let it rest. And then when it needs to get re-engaged, bring it back to the piano. Yeah. But overall, Antonio, really nice. Things are looking good. The octaves are getting better. It's a work in progress. So great job. It's not going to happen overnight, but you're making progress, and that's good. I have 3 things that I'd like to chat about. And Antonio had sent over a MIDI notation file from this that I'm not sure if I'm going to show it. I probably will show it on the screen. I'm going to do my best to read some of it, but as any MIDI dictated piece of sheet music, it is quite interesting to look at. So first up, Antonio, a sense of freedom and time is great. And especially I know, if you're trying to mimic the original piece of music and the freedom, especially in the vocal, that's wonderful. I'd love to hear you add more sense of pulse. At least on occasion. And part of the reason, like, for example, in the original recording, part of the reason all of the fluidity works so well, all of the rubato and the change in tempo and the freedom, part of the reason that all works so well is that the guitar player is changing the plucking pattern and changing their rhythm to really be in perfect sync. So we don't have any big pauses or lulls. Hey, Sergey. We don't have any pauses or lulls in the movement or in our sense of where the phrase is going. We just get moments of hanging. So, Antonio, I listened to Chet. I picked out an album, and it was vocals and guitar. Maybe it was not the original. You should send me the original recording. I pulled up a recording on Spotify and took a listen, and it was credited to Chet Baker. If that is not the right recording, send me another one, and I will take a listen. But to tie this together, piano, trumpet, and voice. Okay, that is not at all what I heard. So I'll love to take a listen to that, Antonio. Send me an email. But what you could do, Antonio, is can we maintain a little bit more of a sense of pulse with some of the chords you give us? So, let's see. Just so everybody can see what I'm reading off of. So here we are, and oh, that's confusing. So now I'm in bar 22. So that's a great line to talk about where we can maybe add a little more sense of pulse. Because I think it's already pretty good. I don't know if that's the actual rhythm of the original. But something like that. So pulsing on whatever this chord is. Right? So can we show some of that? Can some of that keep going? And then as you want to play with the melody and you want to play with rubato and time, we get an idea of how it all fits in. Instead of if we just get one chord and it sits, and then we move on. Yeah. Hey, Cataclysmo. Yeah, Antonio, it's I wouldn't call it necessarily interpretation yet. But I do think that if we can get some good practice building a phrase around a more solid sense of pulse, that's going to be helpful for you. And when you have this opportunity, when the left hand isn't doing as much, when the chords are more in one place and you're not trying to add those other voices like we talked about last time, that's a great opportunity. Throw in another half note. Play 2 half notes per bar. Right? Or you could even just pulse the bottom note. And then think about where it goes from there. Yeah, and one other thing. As you add notes, lower pitches, like we talked about last time, can you add an octave lower? Can we add something else just to expand that, the registration, expand how we're using the tones on the piano to mix together? When you have that good sense of pulse established, can you try adding those low tones on beat 1? So make sure we know where beat 1 is in the phrase, and then go there on 1, then to your chord on 2 or 3, depending on how slow the tempo is and where those beats are. That's really going to be a nice way we can count on that sounding good. We don't have to worry that the low note is going to fit or not fit, or we're going to lose a sense of time. Put it on beat 1 if you can. Cataclysmo, oh, hey, okay. Hey, Jose. Well, I don't know anything about any of the rest of what you wrote, Cataclysmo, but I can say hey to Jose, so hey, Jose. All right, Antonio, next up, pedal blur, and this also goes with the other question you sent on the email. So, Antonio, do you think when you're playing, when you heard it back, especially today, how did you feel about the pedaling? And do you feel equally aware of your use of pedal while you play as when you listen back? Oh, no worries, Cataclysmo. So yeah, Antonio, just give us a reaction to the pedaling. Yes, so you say you're doing it by ear. The problem is that your ear is bad. Well, we're working on it, right? So, Antonio, whenever we have harmony, so we have to be aware of the harmony we're playing. And I think you're really aware of that because you're playing this memorized. You're not even playing off a lead sheet. You know the song very, very well. You know the tune really well. And as you're looking for chords, you definitely know where things change. Anytime harmony changes, at least for now, anytime harmony changes, take a new pedal. So all of those, even though maybe only one note of the chord is different, G, G sharp, A, back to G, F on the bottom, the rest of the chord is very much the same. But every single one of those pitches changes the harmony drastically, right? So every time you change, take a new pedal. Here. Here. In the meantime, we can hold, even through melody, that moves stepwise, like that. There would be a more advanced way to pedal that, for those of you that are wondering, but we don't have to get into that for Antonio. Just, there are times when stepwise works under pedal, and there are times when it doesn't. Very often it doesn't work if it's in the harmony. That just sounds like bad blur. But here, it doesn't sound nearly as bad as the melodic content. So keep those things in mind, Antonio. And then, yes, about your question. You said you want to pedal a low note and then the low sound cuts off. That's right. So if you pedal on beat one, like we talked about, and this is how this is all tying together. If you pedal on beat one and play a low pitch on beat one, you are guaranteed, as long as the harmony doesn't change later in the bar, that you can hold the pedal down and add to it. And it's all going to work. Where it doesn't work is as soon as... That actually doesn't even sound that bad. What about... There's so much time that's going between each one. They don't sound too bad in this case. Yes, but your instincts, Antonio, is right. Don't pedal and then cut it off. Because that sounds like a disconnect between the resonance that we're trying to build and that you're trying to create by adding the low octave in the first place. So if you add that low note on beat one or before the rest of the harmony gets played, you can definitely hold the pedal down. Now let's say we reversed that and you play this here, and then you play, well, this and this maybe, we're not going to want to blur together. So we have to be really careful. You're seeing how things link together. Where we choose to play lower resonance has to work in conjunction with how we choose to pedal something, right? And the same thing, we're talking about kind of arranging on the spot, Antonio, for you, but the same thing goes in pedaling for all other music. We need to be really aware of how the lowest resonances are working against everything else. And one of the things, this actually relates hugely to 2 lessons that I gave over the past week to the same student, but a week apart. And we were talking about how in a lot of classical music and in a lot of contemporary arrangements too, there might be arpeggiated patterns like this that might be written for the left hand. And there's no pedal marked, right? Maybe let's even keep it a little bit smaller. Something like that. And people, a lot of people are accustomed to pedaling maybe on a beat. And we get something like that instead. And we lose all that low resonance. When first of all, if we just recognize the harmony didn't change, we can keep the pedal down and maintain especially that lowest pitch in this instance that I'm just making up. Yeah? Something else though that can happen. Let's say, oh, thanks, Johan. I'll take that as a compliment. Let's say this is a much more advanced pedaling topic, but let's say we're playing something and all of these are written as 8th notes. That still sounds good with the pedal down, but we're going to go with it just for demonstrative purposes. But let's say we don't want it to be quite as blurred as that is. We want it a little more clear. If you can start to see and recognize on the page, if you're working on something from music, or if you're just playing by ear, that we can sustain. The fingers help the pedal do its job. And so if I want to clear texture, and I don't want to have all of that blurred, maybe there's something that happens in the melody that is too chromatic, that sounds bad, being all blurred together. Maybe that. Well, I have just used my fingers, and I can release the pedal, but that might all on the paper be written as 8th note, 8th note, 8th note, 8th note, 8th note, with no ties, nothing else, nothing in the meantime. But it's something that we can all definitely learn from and learn how to look for on paper. Where can we use finger legato and finger sustain to help aid what the pedal is doing and even aid the melody so that we pedal more clearly through melody, right? But also, Antonio, for your sake, what you're doing with just playing by ear. As you move from here, it's similar without finger sustain, but as we're playing a low pitch and a higher one, we want to be thinking about, does that low note work with the upper note, or does it really not? Is it just dramatically? That would sound good in like a strange, contemporary classical setting. But in jazz, maybe not so much. Yeah? So we're listening for those things and making sure that where we choose to add, Antonio, coming back to where we started, coming full circle, where we choose to add those low left-hand pitches and where we choose to pedal them, that they work in conjunction with the harmony that's around them and try to put them before that harmony so that when the pedal is active and when it's sustaining, we can carry that low resonance through another beat. Because, just to reiterate, your instinct is correct. If soon as you play, and then if you have to lift right away, it doesn't sound great, and it doesn't have continuity of sustain and continuity of harmony. Right? I hope that makes sense, Antonio. Okay, I just had one more thing to think about, Antonio, for you. And that is, when you're playing, occasionally, your right hand as it plays melody, I don't know offhand, because I don't know the tune very well, but I'm thinking some of the times that you play melody, it is the actual melody that you're playing in the right hand, and some of the times there is a little lick that's played that is secondary. Correct me if I'm wrong. And if none of the right hand is playing anything that is secondary or like a second voice or like something that fits in the background, like that, where it's not truly part of the lyric or part of the vocal, part of the main melodic line, then just disregard. But if there are things that are secondary, really work on bringing out what is the melody there, and then what is not. Subdue that so that we really hear a dramatic difference. And if they're happening at different times, you'll have a little bit of an easier time doing that. And if they're happening together, like we talked about in Rhodes's piece earlier today, where we have two voices that are doing different things. But yeah, have that, Antonio, have that really distinct knowledge, firm knowledge, concrete knowledge of when is it that you're playing the melody. You're doing a nice job of bringing that out over the left-hand texture. But if any of those notes aren't melody, can you bring them back down and tuck them in to the left hand? Yeah. Okay. Antonio, that wraps up my comments on this for you. You made really good progress. These are just some added details to continue to think about. Let's give Antonio another round of applause. Because, yeah, nice work and good practice over the last month. Hey, Christian, I cannot add another video today to the stream, but I will check it out either for the next one or I could try to get back to you in the meantime. So one of those two, Christian, for sure. But yeah, I cannot add videos right in the middle of the stream. That's super difficult. All right, yes. Great applause for Antonio. Very nice work. And I covered your question. All right. I have two questions that came in before the stream started today, that came in a couple days ago. They're going to be fairly quick questions, and then we can have some time just to chat with all of us that are here in the stream. My pleasure, Antonio. Absolutely. Okay. First thing was a question from Quentin, and it was about two VSTs, the Garriton CFX and the new Modern D by VI Labs. And Quentin, you were asking about, you said the CFX sounds really kind of bright and thin. I should just pull up what you said. Let's see. So Quentin says, the tone of the Garriton CFX is a little too bright for their taste, especially in the bass register. And yes, I have used the Garriton CFX a ton. And so the question is, does the Modern D have a more round and less bright bass notes? Or could you achieve a rounder bass sound by tweaking settings in the Garriton CFX library instead? Okay. So Quentin, the underlying answer to that is there's twofold. One is that the CFX is a Yamaha, and even the CFX that is I think by far the roundest, most balanced of the Yamaha instruments, it still lives in the Yamaha tonal family, which tends to be on the brighter side and more of a pure tonal quality. And because of that, it tends to sound more focused and more direct. Whereas a Steinway is known for having a very thick tonal quality, right? And brightness is usually not a word attributed to a Steinway. So because of the two instruments that were used in the sampling session themselves, those are going to lend themselves naturally to different tones that we just cannot change using production. A Yamaha CFX is always going to record brighter than a Steinway D. I mean, in the VST format, it's always going to be that. And in real life, it's almost always going to also follow that formula. So if you don't like the tone of the bass in the Garriton CFX plugin, it's really how the piano is built and how the hammers were voiced. That's what you don't like down there. And there's not going to be much of any EQ that we're going to do that's going to get rid of that character. We could tame some of it, but in the process of taming some of the bass area, it's also going to get rid of some of the really nice bell quality and punch that lives in the upper area of the piano also. And so it's going to be a compromise, one of the two. You could try EQing some of that out, some of the brightness out, and you can look at like 3,000 to 5,000 hertz and taking some out. And then you can also look at like 8,000 hertz and up and taking some out from up there. But know that it's going to always be a compromise if you do that. Purely from an instrument standpoint, I do think you'll like the bass of the modern D, simply because it's a Steinway, and Steinways usually have very thick bass. All that said, and this comes back to the second thing that I wanted to bring up, is that concert grand design is remarkably similar from brand to brand to brand. So, Steinway and Yamaha and Bösendorfer. Let's pick another one to throw in there. Mason and Hamlin. They do all have distinct characters of their individual pianos. But I mentioned this on the stream before a little bit, so this might sound familiar to some of you. At the flagship piano level, so the biggest grands, usually those big differences are the smallest. So a Bösendorfer Imperial still has a distinct tone, but it has a lot more in common with a Steinway D, which is as close as they get, than, let's say, a Bösendorfer 200, which is like a 6-7, and a Steinway B, which is a 6-11. A Bösendorfer 200 and Steinway B sound hugely different. Like, you can really hear the difference in the brand between those two instruments. And the differences still exist in the concert grand, but they're much more minimal. So all that being said, going back to the question about the two libraries, concert grands are typically voiced to have a really strong projection across the instrument, but especially in the bass. And so the modern concert grand voicing is a really big, growling bass sound for most concert grands. If you're looking for something that's not that, that's going to be much more difficult to find. So I bring that up because the modern D is warmer because it's a Steinway and because it's Steinway design, but it still has a lot of overtones, which cause things to sound bright. It's just bright when you play forte, fortissimo, triple F, right? Fortissimo. It's just a different kind of brightness. Maybe you'll find that that brightness is more appealing than the Yamaha one, and that's why there are artists that choose one brand over another. You like one particular sound of an instrument more, usually because of the overtone sequence and how that's been designed into the sound. So, Quentin, those are my answers for you. You can, so recapping, you can tame the CFX a little bit with EQ, but if you really want a warmer sound, the modern D is going to give it to you, but it's not going to give it in spades. It's only going to be a little bit warmer because of how concert grand design works across brands. Yes, Antonio, that video is great. You say there's a Vienna Symphony. It might be the VSL. Well, it's definitely from that hall. I think it's like Synchron Hall stage. And they have 3 acoustic instruments. And it's not a comparison of libraries. It's a comparison of Bösendorfer and a Steinway, as a Hamburg Steinway, and the Yamaha CFX. Oh, and the Fazioli is there too. Yeah. Yes, yeah. It's interesting. It's very interesting because you can hear both of those things, the similarities and the differences in character. And it's much more subtle. It's interesting to listen to. Go listen to it. If you just YouTube Vienna Symphony, like Bösendorfer Steinway comparison, I'm sure it'll come up. Antonio, I don't know if the link came through. Seth, great question. I'm going to come back to that because I have one more question from before the stream to talk about. And that was from June. And I'm just going to, I don't have the little graphic that June sent, but this is about For Elise. I know you've all been waiting anxiously to talk about For Elise. Okay. I'm going to pull up her graphic just on my end so I can reference it. And I'll tell you, and I'll kind of annotate on my iPad the differences. So June has been working on For Elise, and she has two copies. One from 1939, a 1939 print. She didn't mention the publisher. And then a new, probably just a new engraving of the same piece. And it was done by a different editor, which means the fingerings are different. And she is specifically looking at measures 77, 78, and 79. So here we are. This is the Henley Urtext edition. I don't know offhand who the editor of this was, but the fingering presented here pretty much follows the 2024 version that June quoted. And I'll fill in, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 1, yeah. Okay, her versions recommends 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 5. And then implies 4, 3, 2, 1, and then repeated 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 5. Up until, and that repeats and repeats and repeats up until the top 5, 4, 3, and then 1, as printed in my edition. The other edition that she sent over, I'll put these in blue instead, begins this passage with 2, 4, 1. And then 2, 4, 5. There's a similar finger. 4, 3, 2, 1 is all the same. And then 3, 1, 2, 4, 5. Okay. Okay, so June's question was about these two fingerings. Why? What are the benefits of them, and why would you choose one? Is there a reason to choose one over the others? Nathaniel, Henley fingerings are hit and miss. It really depends on who the editor is. There's one I've been talking with a friend of mine about. My Bach Well-Tempered Clavier is edited by Hans Martin Theopold, and I really can't stand a lot of the fingerings in it. I don't like them. And my friend sent me over a few pages of, the maestro. I can't think of his name offhand. The very famous Bach maestro whose name I'm forgetting. Anyway, if one of you know that, drop in the chat because you can fill in my blanking. Anyway, the fingerings in the other edition are I like them much more. Different people are going to like different fingerings a little more than others, but they fit my hand much better. If anybody knows who I'm thinking of, if you can get in my brain, maybe it'll... Schiff! Yes, Licia! Licia, I'm sorry. Schiff, thank you. The maestro. I prefer Schiff's fingerings than to Hans Martin Theopold. Okay. Back to this passage here. Why would we choose the one in red? And this is the newer recommendation. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 5, 4, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 5. Yes? Okay. The reason why we might choose that is because traditionally, in a lot of modern pedagogy, when you learn arpeggiation, you learn the fingering. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is a little different in that it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 5, so we can turn around. But then 1, 2, 3, 1. So this thumb tuck under the hand across a fourth is what would be very heavily practiced by most students if you're working on your technique separately. Nathaniel said, yeah, follow standard arpeggio fingering. So that would be closer to our modern standard arpeggio fingering. And that the thumb tucks under to get to the octave. So if that is a technique you've practiced a lot, and it's very comfortable, it's a great choice. The other choice. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 4, 5. Okay, now you've seen it on the page. I'm going to show you the overhead of that. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5. As I play this, can any of you spot why this is potentially a good choice? What's different between this and this? What's the most important difference? Here it is again. And what's the crux of the change in fingering there? Did anybody pick it up? As everybody scrambles for their phone to type in a response. The aspect, well, welcome the aspect. I'm glad you said hi. You free up the pinky, free up 5. That there is a little bit of freeing up 5. Alicia says you end up further right. Okay, those are adjacent to the most important change. I'll tell us the most important change. We'll see if then somebody types it in the meantime. But most important. First one, or the new edition, let's say. The thumb tuck under the hand spans a fourth. If you have not practiced your arpeggiation using pedal and more of a skip or leap, and you practice pure finger legato, there's a chance that you're going to do what I call the chicken dance at the bench. And you can see a little bit of that in that the arm swings out a ton to facilitate the thumb getting under. And if we look at that on the side, the elbow swings out a ton. We've talked about in the past how bad that is because we're totally out of alignment when we play. Okay. The second choice, 2, 4, 1, places the thumb tuck under the hand under only a third from C to E and frees up the larger interval skip to be played between thumb and second finger. In fact, if you look at the position of my hand right here, the fingering basically matches how we would play a second inversion arpeggio. Did I get that right? 4, yep, 4 on C, 1 crossing. So by shifting how we think about this arpeggio, instead of thinking about it as root position, or instead of thinking that we're going to make the thumb cross under over the span of a fourth, which is large, if we use a different fingering, one that we should have practiced for second inversion, but we just start in the middle of it. Then we get the other choice, the choice that June says is from her 1939 edition. 39? Yes. Which one is better? A little of that is up to you as the pianist and as the person playing. If one of those is an easier technique to execute, for Elise is not an etude. We should be playing it as musically as possible. Unless you want to work on a difficult fingering or one that isn't as natural, pick the one that's easier for your hand. If the modern one, having the thumb go under a fourth, right? If that's easier because it's heavily practiced in your technique, use that. But if you're willing to think a little differently about the passage, my preferred fingering here would be the one that uses like the second inversion arpeggio fingering, where the thumb under the hand happens under a smaller interval. So that tuck under the hand isn't nearly as big. It's definitely not going to cause any elbow movement or misalignment. It's going to be just easier to control. Even if we're playing arpeggios wonderfully, it's going to be... That's great. That's really easy. And guess what? If you've practiced your arpeggios in more than just root position, but if you've also done first inversion and second inversion, you will have practiced that fingering as well. Nathaniel, should it be perfectly even or should we hear the beat? In this piece, this is one of the more dramatic moments because it's coming out of this. Sorry, I'm playing it very fast, but we shouldn't hear too much pulsing, like da da. We shouldn't hear that. But it's absolutely a good interpretation if you hear beat 3 leading to 1. Yeah. Yeah, Nathaniel, you say that's why you would use 1, 2, 3. Well, the thumb would be heavy. But I don't think not every beat would we want to hear like that. We definitely don't want to hear that. That sounds clunky and thuddy and like our technique isn't as developed as it should be. The other fingering helps to minimize that problem if you don't have great control over the thumb falling and landing too heavily after a cross and an arpeggio. But if you do, you can play it with that fingering and it's just fine. Then the other one. Huh. Yeah. They're both good choices. We've talked about all the reasons why they're... So, June, I hope that's helpful. And, yeah, very interesting question. So, thanks, June, for that question. Okay. All right, great. We've got like 15 minutes left. I know we had a question or two come in across the stream today. I don't know how many of you that were here at the beginning are still here. But let's see here. Is Wesley still here? Because I could continue talking a little bit about my production stuff that I use. Wesley, if you're interested and you're still here. Or, Cataclysmo had asked about my opinion on the new Chopin waltz. Let's see, Christian, we talked a little bit about your stuff. And Seth asked, are there any physical movements of the body that you'd recommend instead of tapping a foot for keeping time? All right. Seth, I'm assuming you're still here. Let me see. I'll go ahead and answer that first, and then we'll see if the posters of those other few questions are still here, and I can go back and answer those. Seth, something else you could think about a little bit, instead of tapping a foot all the time. I'm laughing because I have a student that I'm trying to get to stop do what I'm about to recommend to you. But I think it does have merit at different points of learning. In keeping time, if you're playing, let's say, for example, let's use for release since it's up. I have a student, and she was taught, and it does have merit, that there are little bounces of the wrist for each beat. That can be a great way to help keep time that's separate from the foot tapping, right? If the foot tapping isn't working for you, or if it's distracting, or any one of those reasons, the trouble is with this is that as you move the wrist, we're altering a little of the technique of how we're playing, and we're going to introduce bumps in the playing. So if you really need to work on tempo and time, this is fine in short increments and in short bursts in your practice. You could play scales that way. Maybe it'd be better to play scales that way than work on your repertoire like that, because we might end up introducing bumps and accents where we don't want in a phrase. That's the reason to get rid of it. We don't want it to be like an instinctual part of playing the piano, which is what I'm currently working on with my in-person student. She does not even know she's doing it when she does it. It's all just, it happens in the background and subconsciously, and it causes all those musical issues. So we're trying to remove that from her technique, the way she's played for 20 years. Yes, so Nathaniel has kind of you said you danced a long time with right hand, and it's hard to unlearn. So it can be something that I think is helpful, but maybe limit it to scales or just technique so that we can feel that. If you can, Seth, beyond moving the foot, let's take one hand at a time. If you're playing one hand at a time, you can have the other hand tap the beat for us. And it can happen right on the top of the fall board or against your music rack, something like that. Whatever you have close by. It could even be down on your lap too. Right? But of course, because we're engaging the hands, we can only use one hand at a time while we practice that. The other physical thing that I might suggest is, even if you don't count the beats, saying bum, 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 bum can be great. It's still a physical movement because we're activating the voice and we're feeling it with the body, but we're not actually moving any of the big muscles. So we're not going to see it as much. It's still helping us to internalize what that beat is. That would be the third thing. Yeah. I think those are my three suggestions. If anybody else has any that have worked for you, feel free to chime in with whatever they have been. But Seth, have you tried some of those in the past? Any of those in the past? I agree, Nathaniel. If it's possible to count, that's ideal. Hey, Seth, I just had another idea, actually. And maybe before you even try the wrist one, don't try it if you're trying to perfect a piece of music. Just leave that out of the equation. If you're working on interpretation and you've learned the notes and you're trying to study things out, I wouldn't necessarily. I would rather add accents on every subdivision, like and. I would rather do that to help feel pulse than shift what the wrist is doing. So try the wrist stuff in technical warm-ups only for now. Alicia says flashing metronome, and that's okay. Sometimes our eyes, the way we follow things, we can actually be behind if we follow after we see, right? Yeah, Seth, let me explain what I just did a little more, because I used a little bit of that arpeggio from For Elise. What I did was I started with on the beat accents. So 1, 1. Even though counting this would be like triplet, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. That would be one type of practice through. The next type, I would accent the next note of the group. So 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. And then the third note of the group. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. And then together, all those, if I loop them together, here's 1, the second note, and the third note. And then we are mixing up where that accent falls, but we're still very firmly feeling a sense of pulse across the passage that we're playing. So by not doing it the same way on every pass, we're not going to be programming too much drop and fall in a very unmusical place. Yeah. The other thing, I didn't get to finish my thought from before. The other thing that just occurred to me is, Seth, pull up if you have a recording of the piece you're working on that you're listening to, hopefully a really good one, or if you're working with a teacher, can you ask them to play it and send you a recording, even if it's just like on an iPhone. Send a recording over, especially at the tempo that you're working on. And can you, while you listen to the recording on stereo or on earbuds, can you move to the beat with your entire body away from the piano? What pace is it? Can we walk to it? Do we have to run to it? Can we bounce on our toes to it? Something like that. Where now we're using more of the body and we're not affecting how we approach playing the piece with the hands in a way that might produce unwanted results later on. So, can you take that recording? Can you listen to it? And can you move in some way that matches the pulse of a good recording so that you internalize that and feel that throughout the whole body? Bounce on the toes, walk, run, etc. That would be a great thing to do. If you've got the space to do it, you could do it outside. Yeah. So that doesn't immediately, it doesn't immediately translate to playing, but it has a huge impact on how we feel pulse and how we internalize that. And that's what we really need to work on to get the fingers to play better in time. The fingers probably can already because you've been practicing. It's just that our body needs to learn better what it is to feel something in perfect time. So can we have bigger movements that show us that? Great. Okay. I believe that the other couple quick questions that came in. Let's open it up to one more question because the other two commenters, I think they may have left. And I'd rather answer something for all of you that are still present if you have a particular question than something else. So, do we have a question just to end the session today? It'll be the last one of the day. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and especially for just dealing with all the technical issues at the beginning. I appreciate you sticking around. Whitney, great question to finish with. Whitney said, do you have any tips if you're doing repetitive practice like scales to not zone out? Yeah. Any type of repetitive practice, first and foremost, limit the amount of looping you do. So looping is where you just go back and replay what you were just working on. If we take a scale, for example, That's one loop, two loops, next loop. That's way too many already. So I don't know if you do something like that, Whitney, but for everybody, that's too many loops. Limit the number of loops. Sometimes there can be a little bit of a positive feedback, like a physical feedback that we feel where things get, Nathaniel, you took the words out of my mouth, but I'm going to get there, where we feel that as we play something repeatedly, it gets better, right? But truly, it only gets better for a couple iterations, one or two iterations, and then the mind starts to go, and the body's just repeating, but it's not actually connecting any better. What the brain needs to write, like the neurons that need to connect, that need to fire in the right way, they stop being written after one or two or three repetitions. So it feels good because the muscle memory is like, oh yeah, we just did this and we've got it. You come back 30 minutes later, most of it's going to be gone. So first and foremost, limit looping. And secondly, between iterations or between variations or between repetitions of whatever it is you're playing, pause, take 5 seconds. If you can count to 5 to start with, you're going to be on great track. It's going to feel like a really long time. But in those 5 seconds, the mind resets and we get to refocus on what it is that we're doing. Now, bonus points. In those 5 seconds, can you pick something in particular to work on about the next repetition? Not just play it better. That's not specific enough. But let's say we're playing a scale and the cross to 4 in the left hand wasn't good and it wasn't consistent. We're going to pick out that one thing and say, next repetition, I'm really going to focus on it, or I'm going to slow down for it so I make sure I play it right, or I'm going to accent it so I make sure that I am really writing in my brain the right finger in the right place at the right time in a strong way. All of those were just ideas about how we can provide variation, but in a really structured way that immediately improves something, some part of what we worked on that wasn't good enough. So we play it, we reflect on what wasn't good, take those 5 seconds, pick something different to work on with the scale that's really specific, and then work on that in the next repetition. Then the repetition after that, if you need to do another one or however many more we need to do, we pick something else specific. Or if it's the same problem we had, we tackle it in a different way, just a totally different way. Going back to what Nathaniel said about variations and groupings, those are also really important. So variations would be things like, if you're playing, I'm just playing C harmonic minor, we start with, if it's working well and we just want to continue to practice a very solid scale that we already know well, maybe the first time through is mezzo forte. Second time through, after a few seconds, we're going to play forte. So strong, maybe not fortissimo, but strongly. Next time through, what about pianissimo? How quietly can we play it and still articulate every note? For me, I would have said, that's not good enough. I need to do that again. I didn't articulate 4 and 5 in the left hand at the beginning the way I wanted to. I would slow the tempo down to play pianissimo. And I would go back and then try to speed it up until it gets better and better with that one particular thing I'm working on. So there's a combination of two things. So as we include specific variation, like different dynamics, Nathaniel mentioned groupings, which would be like rhythmic groupings, where we pause on a note, take a break, and keep going. Those are also really great to keep us from getting bored. You can introduce crescendos and decrescendos, or decrescendos on the way up and crescendos on the way down. You could introduce different dynamics or articulations on different pitches. So these are all just ways of continuing to vary how we play the scale. And they're all going to be beneficial. But I think most important is that every time you play it, take a little bit of time and reflect on what really needed improvement. And for everybody, if your answer is ever a general, well, the scale needs to be better, that is not a good enough answer to make your practice time really productive. What specifically about the scale needed to be better? What finger needed to be better? What articulation needed to be better? What cross needed to be better? Do we miss a dynamic? Did we accent something? Did we lose tempo? Did the hands become desynchronized? Which hand was at fault for doing it? We want to ask all of those questions until we can better learn how to pinpoint where that mistake or where that little flaw is that we're trying to make better, and then focus on that one in the next repetition. And if you do that and you string those together with those 5-second breaks, you're going to make a ton of progress, way faster than if you just ran scales and just continued and continued and continued. Great question to end with, Whitney. Thanks so much for that question. Nancy, I have not read that book. Daniel, is it Levitin? This is Your Brain on Music. I heard there was a secret chord. 2 different books there. Nancy, I've not read. I don't think I've read those. The title of the first one sounds very familiar. I feel like I'm possibly thinking of, there was a PBS special that maybe had the same title. I wonder if it referenced his work. But there were all kinds of studies about how our mind changes, the development of the mind changes, and that may be what's coming to mind, but I don't think I've read the book. I might pick it up, though, because I'm very interested in this stuff. Okay. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for spending the first Wednesday of the month together instead of the second and fourth. It is going to be sometime before the next stream. Actually, it's going to be December before the next stream, because I'm very excited, but next Wednesday, I'm going to be filming at the Mason & Hamlin Piano Showroom and Factory. And then the week after that, there's actually a really cool recording session that is happening right here on this piano. And it's not even me. But I'm running the session. But there's going to be some Beethoven recorded here in 2 weeks. And the week after that is the day before Thanksgiving. So the next stream is going to be the 4th of no, it's going to be the 11th of December, probably. The second Wednesday of the month. 11th of December. There's going to be a big pause, so I hope you'll still come back and visit. And yes, I said the next stream is going to focus on All I Want for Christmas Is You. Please, I mean, if somebody wants to work on that, we'll work on it. But really think about that before you send it over. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for being here the whole time. Wesley, I see you now, but I didn't hear back from you about your question, so I did not go to answer it. But thanks for being here, Wesley. For sure, tune in again, Wesley, and we can talk about more of the production stuff. I'd be happy to. It's a second passion of mine, second to music itself. Oh, Wesley, I'll mention that real quick. The plugins, and then we'll finish up today. So, Wesley, first of all, the mics that I use on the streams are actually under the lid of the piano. They're quite close. I don't mic the piano that way for other types of recording, but it provides a lot of isolation between where I'm talking and the sound of the piano. So they're under the lid. They're small diaphragm mics, so they're really easy to position around. Goodness gracious. Okay. Wesley, are you ready? They're not PMZs. They're small diaphragm mics, and they're just in shock mounts. And these I have cardioid capsules on, not omnidirectional capsules. Omnidirectionals, I think, sound great, but sometimes they're a little bass heavy and they're a little difficult to work with. So, okay. And on coffee, yes. Okay, the mics that I use run through, I use almost all Universal Audio plugins and hardware. I have a couple other things that I use here and there. But that's really the big components of my setup are UAD, Universal Audio. I think the D is digital. I maybe look that up, but Universal Audio and UAD. I use an Apollo interface. It has preamps built in. And let's see, for plugins, the Fab Filter Pro Q3 is one of my favorite, very easy to use EQ plugins. It's very versatile. It's very powerful. Sounds really good. Let's see, for this stream, I'm also using an emulation of the Teletronics LA2A as a compressor on my vocal mic. And I'm using an emulation of the Manley Very-Mu compressor on the piano. I don't have any reverb on this stream, but sometimes if I do performance streams, I'll add a little reverb, and that is usually an Altiverb. That's Altiverb. It's usually one of the presets in that plugin. And then for post-production, if I was doing a standalone thing and not for broadcast, my favorite limiter is the Fab Filter Pro L2. The Pro Q3 and the Pro L2 and the Very-Mu, the Manley Very-Mu plugins are on every single piece of audio that I put out. I love them, whether that's on this channel or in the stream or on my other channel that is all performance. I always use those three plugins. So there you go, Wesley. And if you want to talk about more, tune in next time and ask me a few questions about it, and I'm happy to share some more stuff. Okay, thanks for being here, everybody. If you're celebrating holidays this month, have some great holidays. Travel safely. Stay safe as the weather changes. And yeah. Yes, Wesley, looks great. I think you got all of that. Pretty close. There are a couple spelling things, but they'll all come up on Google. All right, everybody. Thanks again for being here. See you in about a month on a stream. And as always, feel free to send submissions. The information for that is down below in the description. And stay tuned for more videos on the channel. Okay. Thanks again for being here. I always have a great time doing these, and I'm glad we got the technical stuff worked out. See you in a few weeks. All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.